We now move into some Torah, and it's my last bit of Torah before I actually not quite, but my last Shabbat bit of Torah before I head off for the summer. Um, so this portion and something we read was about Balaam striking his donkey, and I want to look at this passage in English and ask a question about whether animals are religious. Do animals have religion? And when I say, are animals religious, I guess my question is, do animals communicate with the divine? Do they understand the divine? Um, and yeah, we're going to dive into the text. I see the chat is lighting up. I want to, yes, thank you, Neil and Liz, for your leadership. It's been really special to coordinate with you before Shabbat, and I felt so welcomed by you both this whole year. So thanks. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I will ask for one volunteer in English to read the passage, and I will scroll down with you. I see Stacy. So the question is, are animals religious? And we have 12 verses that we're going to look at. So Stacy, whenever you're ready.
From God was incensed, right?
Yep.
Okay. God was incensed at his going, so an angel of God was placed in his way as an adversary. Balaam was riding on his donkey with his two servants alongside when the donkey caught sight of the angel of God standing in the way with a drawn sword in his hand. The donkey swerved from the road and went into the fields. Balaam beat the donkey to turn her back onto the road. The angel of God was stationed in a lane between the vineyards with a fence on either side. The donkey, seeing the angel of God, pressed herself against the wall and squeezed Balaam's foot against the wall. So he beat her again. Once more, the angel of God moved forward and stationed himself on a spot so narrow that there was no room to swerve right or left. When the donkey now saw the angel of God, she lay down under Balaam, and Balaam was furious and beat the donkey with his stick. Then God opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have beaten me these 3 times?" Balaam said to the donkey, "You have made a mockery of me. If I had a sword with me, I'd kill you." The donkey said to Balaam, "Look, I am the donkey that you have been riding all along until this day. Have I been in the habit of doing thus to you?" And he answered, "No." Then God uncovered Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of God standing in the way with a drawn sword in his hand. Thereupon he bowed right down to the ground. The angel of God said to him, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? It is I who came out as an adversary, for the errand is obnoxious to me. And when the donkey saw me, she shied away because of me those 3 times. If she had not shied away from me, you are the one I should have killed, while sparing her." Balaam said to the angel of God, "I erred because I did not know that you were standing in my way."
Thank you, Stacy.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you reading.
Happy Pride, everybody.
Thanks. So I have the text here, and I created some questions. I know we'll have to get off the text in a minute, and I will work on sending you the Google Doc link so you have access to it. So we have this strange talking animals, animal abuse. We have sort of these different levels of God and the angel, and the owner of the donkey and the donkey herself. So my questions are, is there something strange about the animal speaking in this passage? And what do you make of the donkey's vision of the messenger? We'll start with those two, and we can move to the next. Sarah, go ahead. I don't know if I have to ask you to unmute.
There we go. You did. It's okay. So I read every week from a book called Torah Queries, Queer Commentary on the week's Torah portion. And I wish I could remember better. I read it early this morning, but it said something about how there's a continuum of holiness, and it sort of put animals in the middle, below humans and angels, but above bugs and plants, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I thought maybe that could apply here, that the donkey is not totally not spiritual, not the angel, not the human, but it's got something.
Yeah, and thanks for giving us that concept of the continuum. You know, I think something really interesting is happening here where I feel like that continuum is being a little bit blurred. I'm curious to hear from more voices from the group today, our congregation. Do we feel like the animal is more holy than the human in this story, or vice versa? Liz? And then Rabbi Joe and Elizabeth?
I really love that the donkey has this fabulous conversation with Balaam and says, look, I'm acting really differently than I normally do. Have I ever done this before? And why do you think I'm doing this? Like, the donkey is calling on Balaam to be a better person. And so I think that's like an example of the donkey's enlightenment.
Yeah, I totally see that. There is something about the animal who we think as being sort of less holy teaching the human being how to be moral or how to be holy. And thank you, Liz. Rabbi Joe?
Hi. So I have a couple of thoughts. So one is that I don't really subscribe to a view of hierarchies of holiness among different living things. I think I'm more in the like interconnected web of life camp. And I love, in response to your first question, as Dorina already pointed out in the chat, this passage does not indicate that there's anything odd about the animal talking. And Elizabeth just said that your question, are animals religious, it feels very apropos in our household. So I'm just going to share, for what it's worth, that we have several times worked with an animal communicator who has helped us understand what's going on with our cats, and even with the chickens and the gerbils. She will talk to all different kinds of animals, and I could talk at length one-on-one about that if anyone wants to know more. But the other thing I just wanted to say is I'm a hospital chaplain, and it's not uncommon for me to encounter Christian patients who have a theology that involves both God and the devil or Satan. And I think that especially in behavioral health settings, there's sometimes an instinct among healthcare providers to really pathologize people who have a theology that includes Satan. But it's actually, almost always in my experience, it's actually a really functional theology. It's a way of hearing the calls for us to fulfill our potential, and the calls for us to really step off the path that we would actually like to be living. It kind of divides those two things into separate voices, and it actually really helps people, I think, make sense of their lives and navigate the challenges that they're experiencing. And we do have a similar concept in Judaism, Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination and the bad inclination. So that was the other thought that I had about the adversary who shows up.
Wow, thanks. I'm very curious to hear more about, maybe another time, the animal communicator. I think my friend is trained to do that, actually. I also saw this research about monkeys who mourn their dead and cry when someone among their community dies. And something I wanted to kind of respond to one thing you said about the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hatov. I feel like the donkey is both being the Yetzer HaTov for Bilam in the story, but also oftentimes humans inflict our Yetzer Hara onto animals as the victims of our own. Animals can be mirrors to us in terms of our own abuse or things like that. Thank you, Rabbi Joe. I see Saul and Leslie's hand up. So Saul and then Leslie.
So when you first asked the questions, I thought about the snake in the garden and the whale in Jonah, and about how Hashem uses animals as a way of communicating with us because we're not listening. Hashem has spoken to Balaam several times already to say not to go, and yet Balaam thinks he can get around it and goes off on his way. But like Rabbi Joe, I was rather astounded always by the fact that Balaam is not shocked that his donkey is talking to him. He talks back to the donkey. He doesn't even say, "Oh my God, my donkey is talking." And I think, well, if he's used to his donkey talking to him, why didn't he speak to the donkey instead of beating the donkey? Which leads us into a whole thing about how, humans, they expect their animals to do. I mean, I don't have a pet anymore. I used to have a bird decades ago, but they expect their animals to do what the human thinks they should do. And often they get very angry when the animal doesn't and forget that the animal has a way that is their own.
Yeah.
And things would work better with sugar than with pounding.
Yeah, it's true. Saul, something you're reminding me of is just in last week's parsha where Moses strikes the rock instead of speaking to it. I know a rock is not an animal, but if a rock is a non-living thing, but water is a living thing, there's a way in which Moses was too harsh in wanting the water to come out and was angry at that moment and was punished for it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Saul. Leslie?
Okay. First of all, I love this conversation. Thanks, everybody. Just want to add an anecdote. That the ass is seeing the angel first. When I worked at Calvary Hospital, which also deals with hospice, I was in a group. We had a facility dog, and there were a few people in the room. This woman was clearly in crisis, and the dog just quietly walked over to her before anybody really said anything and just sat by her. And it was such a beautiful moment. Perception on that animals.
Yeah. Thanks for that story. I've also worked with therapy canines, and it's amazing how intuitive they are to people's needs. And sometimes animals not speaking to us and giving us comfort is what we need, and not someone to, engage verbally. Goodbye, Ron. Good Shabbos. I see. There is something in this story. Is there any other comments before we conclude about any reactions or thoughts about this text? Stacy, and then we can close. Stacy, are you able to unmute?
Okay. Thank you. For some reason or other, it wasn't allowing me to unmute. I just think having a cat, I sometimes I tend to just say to myself, wow, because we're both trying to communicate to each other. He's trying to say something, and I'm like, can my prayer is for me to understand cat language and for him to understand English, but they are very intuitive. They are, as you said, animals. I believe animals have their own soul, and they're all part of humanity. I agree with Joe that I don't like the idea, because we don't understand something, we think that another species is lower than us because we don't know what they understand. But they might understand much more than we do.
Thank you, Stacy. Yeah, I think I love this passage because I feel like it shows us that there's nothing crazy in the Torah about animals speaking. And it also shows if we had this idea, there is a hierarchy of holiness between humans and animals, that the hierarchy in the Torah with God and God's angels, of course, on top, can be blurred. So animals can experience the divine before humans do. And animals can also teach humans how to be holy. And I've had some very sacred interactions with animals in my own life. And I think there's so much more research coming out about how animals grieve and feel, and also even how trees communicate and share resources. And I feel like we're just at the tip of the iceberg of this. And I feel like there's this glimpse in our Torah of this interconnective framework that's not hierarchical. Or if there is a hierarchy in the Torah, it's blurred at certain moments. I want to also bring us to a different part of the Parsha in which Balak, is asked to curse the Israelites, but when, upon seeing the congregation, we see the verse, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov umishkenotecha Yisrael. How beautiful are the tents of Jacob and the dwellings of the Israelites. And this is my last Shabbat for a couple months, so I just want to extend gratitude to the entire Liberal Minyan community. I know that this year has come with the potential for a lot of curses. It has been a year of loss for me personally. Many of you know that I had to relocate to England with my partner when there was a bereavement in his family. And I know it's been a year of communal loss for both people in the CBST community and for so many of us in our own networks. And it's really been energizing and special to see Ma Tovu Panehem. It's so great every other Shabbat morning to see your Zoom faces and your homes and hear words of Torah and hear words of Torah chanted from the klaf and to be under this canopy of talitot with you. And I really feel at home in Liberal Minyan, and I'm grateful to all of you for creating that home for me. Good Shabbos. Happy Pride.